big wave surfing only existed in Hawaii at that time. Like, it didn't really exist anywhere else. The most scary, haunting, like, number one place you would drown.
And it's shocking, like, a human can survive being right there where it lands. You'd think you would just get blown apart. It's so loud. It's insane.
And I remember just paddling in and standing up and feeling stuck. And maybe an hour later where everyone's like, where's Mark Fu?
I had to live a little off. Yeah, I had to cut a bill off. Yeah, but if we be real though.
All right, let's talk about maybe the most notorious big wave on Earth, Mavericks. What was your first memory of that wave?
I mean, Mavericks, I remember growing up with, all those movies about, big wave surfing. I think one of the most legendary ones we grew up watching was Riding Giants. And they always made Mavericks seem like the most scary, haunting, like, number one place you would drown. And they were absolutely right. It is terrifying. It's in cold water. The water is denser out there. And so when you fall, you end up skipping a lot more. The initial hit from the wave hurts probably more than just about anywhere else. And the hold down's really long. Unlike Jaws or other big waves around the world that, I would say the best barreling waves on Earth have cracks in the reef. They're like fingers. So like at Jaws, for example, it could be like 30 feet deep at the peak and then another 20-foot deep crack that goes down, and it goes this way. And I think that's what makes the waves barrel really hard. At Mavericks, it barrels because it's hitting this really steep ledge and it's just hucking itself over. It's pretty rare that it stays open unless it's a perfect swell, but it has these like staircasing, like drops, like all these ledges. And so when you fall, it feels like you're going over a waterfall underwater after you went over the falls. And then that faster moving water above you is moving so quick and it's so dense that when you're coming up, even while inflated, it feels like you get stuck and you're kind of swirling around. So Mavericks is like a big hit, a good thrashing real quick. And then I feel like you just get like stuck in this like whirlpool underwater and you're doing this and you're like, it's almost worse than getting ragdolled because it gives you time to think. And I remember, real quick, I had a wipeout when I was trying to surf the left, paddling in.
Oh, I remember
fell
that. Yeah.
And I got a black eye from the water. Like, not hitting the water. Underwater, a bunch of water hit me right in the face, and I got a black eye from it. And it's just crazy the amount of power that place holds.
Yeah, and I remember that left. That was my first time to Mavericks. I think that was day 2 when the swell dropped, and that wasn't honestly a big wave, but if it's breaking on that ledge, it seems to not matter how big it is. You're going to get smoked no matter what.
The percussion of that wave when it breaks, I think it was 2016, probably one of my best sessions I had ever had out there. I was paddling back out with Danny Fuller, who's, a legendary surfer from Hawaii. And we were paddling back out and a wave broke because it's such a slab. It's probably the biggest slab wave that I've ever been to or surfed, because it hits one spot. And that's the difference between Pe'ahi, Jaws, and Mavericks, is that Mavericks, you have a 10-foot area takeoff spot. When it's not second or third reefing or 100-foot days, but like a normal paddle day out there where, it might be 40 to 50 feet on the face, it breaks in a 10-foot area. And you can like find that ledge and be right under it and get these crazy rides. And there's waves that are impossible to paddle into just because they jack up so quick. So you're always kind of sitting a little wide. That being said, this wave broke and the sound of it was so loud, it like rang my ears. Like it almost felt like it blew my ears. I'm not even joking.
It was like a full shockwave coming out of it.
Full shockwave because it broke and the air had nowhere to go and it made this cracking sound. And because cold water is so much denser than warm water, I think that was part of the reason. But the loudest lip to landing on the surface of water is always at Mavericks. It's just like, because it's such a slabbing barrel, the air has nowhere to go. And so it gets really compressed and it makes this just violent, thunderous sound.
And it's shocking, like a human can survive being right there where it lands. You'd think you would just get blown apart. It's so loud. It's insane.
Well, I
But
think over the years, right? Like
Yeah.
people have proved that you can survive just about anything, whereas before it didn't seem possible. And some of those waves, I mean, you see it, and I see it every time we surf big waves now, and especially at Mavericks, you're like, there's no way that guy is living through that.
Oh, every
no way.
swell you see something like
Or
that.
they're
It's insane.
broken really bad, and they're not somehow.
Yeah,
It's just
true.
like some guys do get, I would say there's like those paddle-in guys that you never hear if they got hurt or not. They kind of just like
They just disappear for a while.
Well, it's different too at Mavericks because a lot of the crew does paddle offshore, and because it was a place where you wouldn't have water safety, I think people collectively pay Mavericks Rescue, the water safety team that consists of like a Frank Chiarte and a few of the other legends out there that have been, there since the beginning. I think everyone chips in into that crew, and it's a smaller area, so it's, I think, a little bit manageable. But yeah, I mean, guys probably get super hurt, and I mean, we're gonna get into depth on like the deaths of Mavericks, and that's the scariest place to wipe out because it's very easy to get forgotten and swept,
into
across
rocks.
into rocks from the land of the lost, or just across this reef. They call it like Black Hand Reef, and it just goes forever, and it turns into the most psycho slab wave with boils and gnarly. So Mavericks isn't only the gnarliest wave right there; it's like slabbing onto like dry reef just around the corner. So it's really a trip.
Yeah, before I went there, I never knew there was that reef there. And on some of those really big days, we're like going in, and this thing's just sucking below sea level dry. It looks like chopes, and it's right on the inside of Mavericks. It's not like Jaws where it's just the channel goes pretty much to shore. It's like this huge reef that it all closes out on. It's a trip.
Yeah, it's like it's the biggest, most violent boils I've ever seen. The boils like are boiling out of the water. I swear they're going like 10 feet up. Like it's unsurfable. If you hit it surfing on a towboard with straps, you'd still spin out and blow up. And it's so shallow, and it just closes out. And the way the boats get out there, and we have some legendary boat stories actually with
we need
Ian
to get
Walsh
into
and
those.
stuff.
Oh gosh.
But there's like only a small channel you can get these boats out. So the fact that boats are out there when it's gigantic is pretty gnarly, because just to leave the harbor, which it's one of the sickest harbors we have in the surrounding areas of a big wave. And ironically, all the best big waves in the world seem to be by some harbor. Jaws is farther away, but common thing is the biggest trenches are where they're going to build the harbors because it's the deepest water and it's the easiest accessibility for the big boats, right?
Yeah, 100%.
But now that we got that through, let's get into some lore. Yeah,
I was just watching that segment from Riding Giants where they're talking about Jeff Clark's years out there, and every time I watch it, I still can't wrap my head around the fact that that he surfed it alone for 15 years. He couldn't get anybody,
or was it 25?
That's what they said. They said 15.
Okay,
in the documentary, but
I think I just crossed that barrier surfing big waves. Like I would consider, like once you start surfing Jaws, like becoming a big wave surfer. Then I think I'm maybe at 17 years now. So the fact of him surfing by himself, Mavericks, that is pretty gnarly. It's like I can't wrap my head around that.
It's scary enough having the water safety 30 feet away and having a giant crowd of 50 people out there. Being out there alone, not to mention the sharks, the water's brown. You can't see your hand underwater, and it's just the scariest wave ever. Well, and he used to surf the left too, in the early days.
I think he mainly surfed the left.
That's crazy.
And the craziest thing, this is Jeff Clark's an absolute legend. And it's rad. Like if anyone's not seen Riding Giants, you should definitely look it up. I think you can rent it on YouTube, or it might actually just already be bootlegged it up there. But his segment's pretty wild, and it really goes into the lore of it. But I think, he was trying to get people to go surf with him out there. And I kind of appreciated where he was coming from, because this guy was a switch stance surfer. When he'd go left, he'd surf or goofy foot. And then when he'd go right, he would surf regular foot. So he's the gnarliest, maybe the original big wave switchfoot surfer. And to do it at Mavericks is insanely impressive. He was also shaping his own boards. And so he was doing all that R&D. He had probably 15 years advantage on everybody. And I know he's cooking up some different shapes from what I've heard that are, quite unique to what we're riding now. But that being said, the theory is this is what I understand is he used to make these longer boards and make them thinner. And so he could duck dive. So the thing is the fastest component to a board is water line. The longer you have a board, whether it's thick or thin or narrow, the water line is speed. It's lift over that distance. That's what you get the most lift when you get picked up on a swell. But he purposely kept it really thin so he could actually duck dive through waves. And I guess when you're out there by yourself, surprisingly, he was surfing the left the most. But the left is like pipeline with more of a clamp at the end, and some waves stay open and some do not. But I just can't imagine even like surfing out there without some sort of flotation. And granted, the leash was their big safety net because they'd be tombstoning, and that's where all the most legendary tombstones are. And tombstoning is when the board's like straight up and down. It's your tombstone, and you're on the other end of that leash, and you're upside down, face down. Yeah. And they'd climb that. But also, I think if you're wearing 5mm wetsuits, that actually has a lot of flotation. It actually probably has just as much as like a spring with some flotation in it here.
True.
So they did have some flotation, but not like we do now, which actual pads and actual airbags. So, he went 15 years without dying. Finally got someone to go out with him.
And it's like, it's almost like he didn't really care if it was even documented either. He was just doing it just because he liked riding big waves,
and so
which is just the most core thing ever.
Oh, that's the most core. Who
So
was it that
sick.
joined him? It was Richard Schmidt from Santa Cruz and another gentleman. I know Richard Schmidt was in the Eddy and he put on a show, and he was like, I think blew the Hawaiians away back in the day of being like, oh my God, there's big wave surfers in California. And that's what, I think we should go into another legendary part of the tale of Mavericks, which was, legends like Ken Bradshaw and Mark Fu and some other Hawaiians flew overnight after surfing Waimea Bay Giant to go surf Mavericks. And it was up to that point, the day of days, 1994, guys were just charging. The Hawaiians were, I think, pretty impressive. I think they were impressed by the Californians, but it was like, to them, it was a point where the locals out at Mavericks truly believed what they had was special, because big wave surfing only existed in Hawaii at that time. Like, it didn't really exist anywhere else. And now, wait, California's a big wave spot? I mean, up to that point, the Half Moon Bay, which is just on the other side of San Francisco Bay, it was known for its annual pumpkin festivals in October. And that was the only thing it was kind of known for. And I mean, now it's one of the most iconic places on earth for big wave surfing. But
it's like a mainstream iconic place in America, I feel like now.
Oh, yeah. And the craziest thing is where these big waves exist. Like, if I'm just flying through San Francisco, whether it be the summer or winter or whatever, you can look out your window and see Mavericks from taking off on the airplane. As you go back to Hawaii, you go over the mountain range, and it's only 30 minutes from the airport. Like, it's just so crazy.
It's insane.
But I guess back on topic with Mark Fu, he ended up drowning. He went on a medium-sized wave, and there's no such thing as a small big wave, because sometimes the worst wipeouts I've ever had have been smaller big waves, ironically. The bigger waves are more terrifying, and sure, I think they can kill you, obviously, because they're giant, but they get so aerated, sometimes you get lucky, and you don't actually get that worked. It's more the fear of being under an 80-foot wave. But a 12-foot wave, 15-foot Hawaiian face wave, which would be like 15-foot would be 30-foot face, which is still a big wave. There's a lot more blue water. It's like, it's pulling. It's harder. There's a lot of water coming out of the channel off the ledge, and it's not aerating as much as quick. So there's chunks of water, and it honestly hurts. Like, I've been concussed just from like the pressure of water going around my head. Like, not impact, just like squeezed. And I think there's a famous shot of him, his last wave, dropped in, fell onto his stomach. And it's really easy to do out there because the water is so dense. If you're not used to it and your board's not tuned for Mavericks, it's hard sometimes to get your rail in the water. And so he's one of the best big wave surfers at the time, falls over, and no inflation, leash, was, probably stretched to 15, 20 feet. Maybe he got hooked on the bottom. But Mike Parsons, and I think it might have been Brock Little, who are two of the most legendary big wave surfers as well. They went on the next wave and they fell, and Mike Parsons recalls feeling somebody underwater, like hitting somebody underwater, and he thinks that he might have gotten caught on the bottom, which is completely not unusual. And it wasn't until maybe an hour later where everyone's like, where's Mark Fu? You know, where did he go? Did he just go in? And back then, really no water safety. It was maybe boats in the channel. There might have been a jet ski or two, but I don't even think there was a jet ski on water safety out on that session. It was just like boats that people would take out. But most people paddled off the beach, which is a whole nother journey we should discuss. But it was actually Evan Slater, who used to work at Hurley, and I was able to work with him, but he used to run Surfer Magazine, and he might have been, the editor at the time. But anyway, he was on a boat, and they were driving back to the harbor, and they just saw someone floating face down. He jumped in the water, and it was Mark Fu. And to people that don't know who Mark Fu is, Mark Fu at the time was the equivalent of like a superhero, who's like a Hawaiian legend. Yeah. And so guys like Mark Fu shouldn't die. It was kind of like when Andy Irons died. Andy Irons couldn't die. He's Andy Irons. It's like as Laird and Kelly Slater. Some of these guys that are bigger than life. That was Mark Fu. And he was the man. So it shook up the whole world of big wave surfing, because up to that point, no one had really died in the modern era of big wave surfing, and no one had ever died at Mavericks. So the reality sank in for everyone.
It was like, dang, this wave is just as legit, if not gnarlier, than the waves that they were paddling into in Hawaii at that point.
Yeah, 100%. You're spot on.
Yeah, and there's been other, notable drownings. I don't know if you want to go into those too, but and it's good to note too that since the inflation era, we can call it, after Shane Dorian had a nuts wipeout and invented inflation, has there been a death at Mavericks since then? I don't think so.
Well,
right?
There hasn't been as far as I know, there hasn't been a big wave surfing death when someone has worn one.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
People have died. Like I could think of two people that probably died in recent memory with the invention of it, but they simply just weren't wearing it. And so that's why for me, if it's 12-foot Hawaiian or 25-foot faces or bigger, I always wear an inflation, because why not? If one of the kings of big wave surfing, Shane Dorian, uses it, why wouldn't I use it no matter what?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't, the new ones they're so slim. It's better than wearing even a life jacket.
Oh, it's so low profile. Like, on a mellower day, you can get away with, not wearing as bulky foam in your wetsuit. Although I like to have static, like flotation, something that if I did get knocked out, I would come up anyway. But at Mavericks, usually you float quite well just in your wetsuit alone. But having that, I wouldn't surf Mavericks without it, to be honest.
Definitely not. Like what you were saying, it's what you're saying is sometimes it's the small waves. Like the other day I fell on you saw I straightened out on like a 12-footer at Jaws.
Yeah.
I was shocked. I've got more smoked on that thing than I have I've gotten super smoked on really big waves, but there's some really big waves, like you said. I was expecting to get absolutely destroyed, and it wasn't all that bad, but I got freaking rocked, and I was getting so pounded I couldn't find my pull cord.
Yeah.
And I ended up pulling it, and I didn't need to because I came up and they're pretty fast and there was another wave. But if I didn't pull it, maybe the board would have clocked me in the head, and then you might as well have it and use it if you got it on.
I mean, that's spot on, Rich. The paddle out. So there's two ways of surfing Mavericks. I usually, captain safety over here, I always try to go out there with, two jet skis, two Sea-Doos, and, one for water safety, one maybe for towing, but then also a backup. I like surfing big waves knowing that, all of our bases are covered. But if you're not doing that, you can paddle off the beach. It takes about, with the current and everything, it can take, I would say, a small day, maybe 30 minutes, a big day, 45 minutes. Wow. And it's pretty right there. There's a nice beach, and it's under a cliff. Sometimes it's foggy and you can't even see out there. And you paddle over this like kind of, I would say little cove area. And if you're going out the right, there's this place called Mushroom Rock, and it looks like, just a big mushroom rock sticking out. And you have the big spiky, gnarly looking rocks. It's like, if you look up the Farallon Islands, it looks like that. It's also like the rocks from, the movie Land of the Lost. but you have to navigate and punch through surf there, and the current eventually pulls you out, and then you end up pretty wide, almost to that closeout reef area that we were describing, and you paddle along that, and then you make it out the back, and you're super far out there, to the point where I'm out there and I'm like, I'm surprised there's not more like shark encounters here, because we're in what they call the Red Triangle, which is the sharkiest place on the face of the planet, and that's from the Farallon Islands to beyond the Golden Gate Bridge. I can't remember the exact area it was, but anyway, it's basically the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, Farallon Islands, which is 15 miles offshore, all the way down to Monterey Bay, which is like beyond Santa Cruz, and it's one of the biggest marine preserves in all of the coast there and all of the Pacific. So that whole area is just abundant with sharks. And I can tell you what, every time I check Mavericks, I usually check it from like another lookout spot beyond where there's like a military base and, these big like towers, radio dishes and stuff that you would line up surfing. But around the corner, I think it's almost sharkier there than Mavericks proper. But I always see a great white. I'm standing up there, and because you're up like, I don't know, 150 feet on this cliff, and you look down, and I swear, if you just stare at the water long enough, you're going to see creatures, whether it's a seal or not, or it's a shark. I've never really seen a great white out at the peak, but I've always seen them cruising like the bay above. And they're just cruising, and they look pretty big. I'd say, they're like, they range. There's juvenile sharks that are maybe 10 feet tall or 10 feet long, but then I swear I've seen like 20-foot great whites just cruising around. And I have heard stories of people like getting rammed from the bottom because great whites like to go in trenches and shoot straight up, but the boards are so big that they kind of like lift up and jump in the air. But no one's been like properly bitten, and there's like 60 guys out at times surfing Mavericks. So you're like, it's not. I don't want to put that out there, but
maybe it's good the boards are so big though. It looks like a big thing. Maybe it's less. It'd be less appealing than like maybe a boogie board or something like that.
Yeah, well, sharks generally go after the easiest prey they can get away with. And I mean, they'll go after whales though, but I think they can smell or sense that a whale's dying, and maybe these boards are just like there's not a vibration coming off of them, so they're unsure. And maybe they consider them a boat. I don't know, because they're smart enough to, I think, tell a difference. But it is quite murky out there, and it's funny. I sometimes feel so comfortable just sitting out the back, and I look in. I'm like, gosh, I'm like a mile and a half offshore. It's brown water, and I'm just cruising here. Even worse towing when it's giant. And we're like literally 2.5 miles out to sea, like when it's breaking fourth reef. Or, one trip we had with Ian Walsh, we coined the outer bit, and I don't know if this is what the locals call it, but we like to call it the 12th dimension, because it's just so far out there, and
it just keeps going out the bigger it gets.
It just keeps going out. It has no end to where it could start to break on that continental shelf. But you were just sitting out there, and you're like, gosh, like, I should probably sit on the sea-doo, because you never know. Like, it's something, and occasionally a seal will come through the lineup, and that leads me into a funny story about Lucas Chumbo out there imitating a seal. But I'll let you speak for a minute.
No, I think I'd be curious to know what your first time out there was like, because I know mine was sort of a mind-blowing experience in that it kind of it was different than maybe what I expected. So when did you first go? Was it on a sup?
The first time I ever went, it was actually, so I think it was 2000. When was the Mavericks comp? Remember where Mark Healy and Jamie Sterling, and it might have been Chris Burdish, got caught inside, and it was a one-of-a-kind video on the GoPro inside the barrel.
Was that 2011?
13, I think.
Oh, okay.
Might have been the Mavericks contest 2013. We'll try to I'd say correct it, find exactly when it was, but it might have been 2013 or 14, and I don't know how I ended up going there, but I ended up getting invited to go check it out, and I just was with my 10'4". I always wanted to go. It's like on your bucket list of big waves to surf, and I'd the past since 2009 on, I was surfing Jaws from towing, and then just starting to paddle in 2011 out at Jaws. So obviously the next thing you have to do if you're an aspiring big wave surfer is you got to go to Mavericks. It's like one of the biggest spots there is. Went there, ended up surfing in the morning. I think while the water was still coming up, and my first wave I paddled into was right on the bowl. I had no idea where the bowl was going to pitch, and Richard Hallman, one of the best big wave photographers, because he makes every wave look twice as big as it really is. He took this photo of me, and it was just apexing, and I was going straight, and the thing landed square on my head.
Oh my gosh.
And it was my first wave, and I got pounded, but it was like I got swirled around. It wasn't bad, you know.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I don't know, it wasn't a giant wave. It was maybe like a 15 footer or something, and popped up completely fine. And I was like, whoa, that was kind of gnarly. And everyone was like, oh, are you all good and whatever. And it was like, and then during that day was really interesting. They threw me a water safety jersey, and I was like running water safety, like. But I wasn't that experienced. Yes, like, but I didn't really go in there because I was like, okay, I'm backup. You know, I don't know this place really well, and I don't want to be getting in the real hero's ways, sort of thing. And I was really obviously Greenhorn Jr. out there. But anyway, they throw me a jersey. I hopped on a ski, and I was just like doing water safety. It was with Jeff Kafka, who is one of the top water safety guys, one of the guys that I really align with out there. He's kited Mavericks, he's surfed it, you know, he's done everything. Stand-up paddled it. He lives right there, and he's a great guy and great point of contact. But anyway, so I did that, and I got to watch it all day and watch the comp go off. And the moment the comp was gone, everybody left. There was not one person out there. And so I had my stand-up. And we were working at the time on a stand-up paddle movie. And that's why I think it was 2013 was when it was happening, because the movie came out in 2014. But I went out on my 9-4 sup, which was nice because you could chip in. And there was maybe like 2 other guys out there. And I ended up chipping in to a couple sick waves, which ended up being in the movie. I basically had Mavericks almost to myself for my first session, the second half, right? And it was awesome. It was just so sick. It was green. It was perfect. It had been all dark and foggy in the morning and a little onshore, and the wind just slacked. It was like, that's my favorite Maverick session, is when the wind slacks, the water turns like this green emerald color, and you can see the sun through it. And it's so clean, and it's scary, but it's also so inviting. And the water turns less brown and turns like a lot clearer and almost, that green color.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was that first session. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this place is like magic. And I was chipping in on the second reef because I was standing up, and I fell on one, and, you know, it was just such a good learning experience, and I was hooked, and I loved it. And then a couple of years went by, and I got like, you know, after you surf Jaws, the monster in your head of Mavericks grows. And I'm like, oh, I'm like, was scared to go back there because it's like, what am I going to get myself into? You know, still figuring out if you really love big wave surfing the way you do. And best thing about big wave surfing and time and experience is you get to see every aspect of it, so you know what to expect. And at that point, I didn't know what to expect out at Mavericks because it was so new, and every session out there is completely different, by the way.
Yeah, I can agree. And I think, is that swell you're referencing the 2018, that offshore day? That was 2016 was the next time. 2016.
So I got in, actually it was pretty rad. I got invited to the Mavericks comp, which was a dream come true. You wanted to be in the Eddy, you wanted to surf in the Jaws competition, you wanted to surf Mavericks. And then it was before anything Nazare related, really, or, you know, just before Nazare had the paddle tour. And I don't know if anyone wanted to be invited to that one, but anyway, that was like, and then there's like the Toto Santos that you always want to be invited to. Which I haven't yet, so maybe one day I'll get invited to it. But anyway, it was like, I remember being in the circle because you do the same kind of ceremony as the Eddy, but it would be at a different time. It would be like, I think, a month before at Mavericks, and I felt like such an imposter because there was all these hammers there, and I'm like, I only went out there once, you know, but it was because of my performances out at Jaws that I had earned maybe an outside spot, you know, from outside of the local hammers. But then it was really rad because I was already in San Francisco for some Red Bull thing. It was in the Bay Area, and then all of a sudden Albie Lair was working on his film A Nervous Laughter, and it was his filmer Dan Arkunis, and he reached out and he's like, hey, Albie, Tyler Ron, Billy Kemper, Mark Healy, we're all going to Mavericks. We have a boat. Would you like to come? And I was like, I was with dad.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
I don't have my boards. Oh, bummer. And I wanted to go, but I was like scared because it's like the hype was big. And sometimes like, Surfline and a lot of these forecasters will hype a swell up and everyone's turning up to be 80 people out there. And it's just like, there's a lot of, how big is it going to be? Is the world record going to be broken? Because at that point, things were still like never before done's were happening. And Shane Dorian was like the GOAT all around. And I remember they offered to bring their boards. So I think maybe you and mom packed up my boards and we ended up going, and our good friend Tucker Ingalls came and joined on the boat as well and paddled a couple on the side. He's a friend from Santa Barbara. So it was pretty cool. And it was south winds, which is notoriously bad for Mavericks, but it was just light enough that it was just making the barrels. It was maybe some of the best paddle Mavericks I've ever had. It was slabbing. It was 10 out of 10 Mavericks. Like, if you were towing, you probably could have gotten like a 5-second barrel out there.
Yeah, it was insane. And I can't remember if I was in Maui or I was in San Diego at college, but I remember
think you were in Maui.
If it was
2016?
2016, I'd be in school already, but I don't know. Maybe it was winter break or something.
February. It was February 2016. It
Okay,
might have been
so
just after your birthday.
yeah, so I would have been. Yeah, that's right. I was studying in college, and I remember every time there was a big swell, I'd obviously just be so obsessive about it. I hadn't surfed big waves really yet, but I was just obsessed with it, and I wanted to see everything. So I was watching. I remember I opened up the computer because I heard Mavericks was firing, and I opened up the cam, the Surfline cam. And literally the first set that came in was just this huge one. And I see a yellow board just dropping in, and then the wave just explodes, like the biggest spit ever. And I was like, dang, I wonder if that was Kai on that thing.
Yeah.
And I think
that
it
was
wasn't
back
until
when I ran all yellow boards and red wetsuits.
Yeah. And then it wasn't until the next day I saw the clip and I'm like, holy crap, that was his wave. It looked, I've seen a lot of like I watched that cam all the time, but that still was the craziest wave I've seen from the cam, just because the offshore wind made it hold up and you just had the most vertical, terrifying drop, and then the thing just exploded. It was like the biggest explosion and then spit. And I know that wave was a pretty darn career-defining wave for you at that point. I feel like that was, you'd done a lot at Jaws, but that kind of solidified you as a pretty nuts all-around rider. What was that wave like?
It's funny. I haven't thought about it in a while, but it was thanks to Grant Washburn, who's been out there for just as long as anybody. He's an incredible filmmaker, but he's also one of the Mavericks OGs. And I got to know him from the previous time and this time, and I was just like picking his brain. I was just sitting next to him, and all the big dogs were sitting farther out, but it was so long interval, and the waves were lurching so hard, and it was so windy. A lot of the guys that would paddle for the waves would wouldn't be able to get over the ledge. And I was sitting I always kind of sat halfway in of anyone, not on the West Bowl at Jaws, for example, or the North Peak, but the middle peak. That was like my thing. Even at Mavericks was like, I'm just going to sit a little bit under everybody. I can still dodge any big sets, but I'll get the ones that they're not going for. And Grant Washburn told me, he's like, shoot it in the knees. Like, go for, when you start paddling really low because it's lurching up really quick. And if you're under that lurch, it's going to be an easy drop. And I just remember that wave coming in, and he's like, the trick is at Mavericks, you got to just sit there and let it come to you. Don't chase it out. And then once it gets to you, start paddling a little bit earlier and try to, shoot it in the knees, get low. And he was the only one that was remotely near me. And I can remember Mark Healy paddling for it at first and missing it because he was on top of it a little bit. And sure enough, I was under it, and I was so committed, and I could just all of a sudden, the crew that I was there with from Maui they were already on the boat. They had already had a session. They were yelling, "Go, Kai!" And it helps so much when someone's telling you to go. If you're like kind of a little apprehensive, you could, but you're a little bit like, I don't know if I would. I have my own self-confidence to do this.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the wave was so buttery clean. I was riding a 9.4, 21 and a quarter wide. I think it was like 3.4 inches thick. And I remember just paddling in and standing up and feeling stuck because it was sucking up so much. I felt like I I'm so used to at Jaws where you have like feedback from the chop of like the board going in and out and bouncing and like kind of, there's a lot of feedback. And in this particular wave, it was the smoothest big wave I'd ever been on. And I like just was stuck. I'm going over in the lip. Like I froze. I just held and like stiffened up, and I could see to my side the biggest barrel ever next to me. And all of a sudden the board let go and I was just going zipping along this wave. And I got to the bottom and I bottom turned. And right as I bottom turned, it spat so hard. Still one of the biggest spits I've ever felt. And I saw a chunk of water like this big go past my head, and I would have knocked me over. You know, it was just such a violent spit. Like it wasn't a spit. It was like a barf of energy. And, you know, that was like, I ended up getting a lot of, my confidence was pretty high. And by that evening, when the swell period dropped a little bit and there was a little more approachable farther out, I got a couple insane chip shots. And it was still, up to that point, it was probably one of the most special sessions of my entire life. It was still, I would say, one of the top 3, maybe top 2 best Maverick sessions that I've ever had. I would say maybe top 3. There's 3 sessions that kind of stand on their own out there for me. But gosh, it was like, it was so fun in the beginning and so terrifying, because on one hand, you're just like, do I really want to do this? And you're scared the whole time. And you see other guys that are not as scared, and, you know, like the big wave OGs you grew up watching. And when it's you, you know, you're like, can I really do this? But now that you look back, the process of doing it and the discovery, it was just so fulfilling and so rewarding, and it gave me so much purpose.
Yeah, for sure. And that definitely echoes sort of my first experience out there. I don't know, you might have had some sessions in between that we can go back and talk about, but I think it was December 2020 was my first time, and that was another really, I'm sure that's got to be one of your tops.
That was the one with the crazy chip shots from out the back.
Yeah,
right?
you were getting that chip and then getting these just huge ones. You surf for like 12 hours straight. So that swell, it was looking like it was going to be big and perfect. And I think you offered to bring me out there. Maybe I was just going to do backup safety, be on the boat, maybe tow you in if there was a chance. And I didn't bring a single board. I didn't bring a tow board. I didn't bring a gun. So I was really sure.
You were a little apprehensive about going out.
That was like, maybe I'd been surfing Jaws for not even a year yet. It was my second season of big waves, and I just was like, there's no way. Like I'm not into big waves enough to want to do this. So I didn't even bring a board. And I remember we were there like so early in the morning. It was dark, and we're going out in the dark, and you're like so confident, you know where to go, but it's like we're going through a maze of, once we exit the harbor, just a maze of white water, and I'm just like, where are we? And then it's literally, the sun hasn't even come up yet. You see that there's no one out, obviously, and you're like, here, I'm gonna get on the rope. Your drive, tow me into some. And next thing I know, I didn't even see a set yet. I don't know where the wave is, and you're in the water, and I'm like, okay, I guess I got to figure out how to tow you in. I have no clue where I am right now. And all you said was just look for the scoop, look for the boil. And I was like, okay. And I was used to towing you in at Jaws, which is such a different, it's like a big wall coming in that kind of wraps around this reef. There, it's like almost a small wave, and then it just like, it's almost like the bottom drops out. And I remember I towed you into a couple big ones that morning, and that was like more terrifying than what was good to come later in the day, because it was really scary, as I didn't know where to put you. I didn't want to get you in a bad spot.
Yeah, there was one photo, Fred Pompemeyer, another big wave photographer that's really good. I think I had a bottom turn at the very bottom, and it was all scooped out, and that's what you were referencing, where it was like you're towing in. I think there was like a close call that session too that kind of spooked you a little bit, because it might have been Nick Von Rupp and Francisco Porchella teamed up, and Francisco, there was a couple of paddlers, and he had gotten forced onto the wave, and he was riding the wave.
Oh yeah,
on the jet ski, and Nick Von Rupp had to straighten out and get worked in the ski. He made it, but it was like so close to a disaster. And then that's when we all switched over to paddling. But I remember that session was just insane. It was, in brief, it was out the back, was myself, Grant Toogie Baker, and Peter Mel at the second reef. Peter Mel always kind of goes out there. A lot of the other hammers were sitting kind of more west and catching like the really steep, lurchy ones. But there was these second reef roll-ins, and that morning, it was Grant Twiggy Baker got a massive bomb. I got to watch it firsthand. I was like kind of in the spot to go, but he got a chip from a little deeper. He ended up falling or getting worked, but it was like arguably in contention for biggest paddle wave, maybe one of the bigger waves ever paddled out at Mavericks, which Twiggy is always chasing. And then I ended up like moving out next to Pete, and Grant Twiggy Baker went out there, and between us, these 3 to 4 wave sets would come in, and we would just rotate. It'd be like, oh, it's Twiggy's going, and you just hope your wave would do something better. But those were probably some of the biggest, tallest waves I've ever gotten at Mavericks still to this day. And it was so much fun because it was so glassy. I was riding, I think, a 910, a 911, maybe. It was a 911.
Yeah.
But I kid you not, with what I know now, on that particular day, which I may never see again in my career, I could have easily caught those waves on a 7.6. Like,
really?
100%.
Because it's just that much of a chip out there?
It was just, it would come in. It would be so steep already and it wouldn't break.
Huh.
It was just like coming in and then it would kind of like start to crumble at the top. And I was on this 10-foot board almost doing 2 strokes. I'd go 1, 2 and stand up. And then I'd have all this time and I'd roll into the bowl, go over the ledge, bottom turn. The thing would stand super tall up and I would could do like a mid-face turn or pull in the pocket and get spat on, and by the time I was going over that ledge, I was passing the group of the next paddlers. So that's how much farther out we were.
Yeah.
And I was like, gosh, I could have caught that on a 9.4 at the time. And then over the years, I was like, maybe an 8.8. And I'm like, dude, if I had a 7.6, you could have faded and like really pulled into the tube. Because on those big boards, once you're kind of in that direction, it's hard to maneuver it one way and then get it back going the other way. So I pray that I have a day like that, and I just, in the boat we go out there, I have the 7.6, and I'll probably start off on my big board, and then I'll be like, wow, I think I could do it on the small board. And then just because you can actually, if you get a facey one, because some will be nice and facey, you could do a huge wrap on a giant wave paddling in.
That was so perfect.
But I got a really big one, a couple big ones. I know Twiggy got a couple big ones. I don't know who won that year. I think the tallest wave went to maybe Peter Mel that year there. I can't remember XL words. It's all a blur, but he got a nice barrel, pocket ride barrel, like spat out. And it was just, at that time, he was like, this is the most perfect Mavericks I've ever seen. I think there's been other days since then, but I thought that was pretty cool. And it's still one of the most fun I've ever had of any big wave session because it was just clear water, blue water, clear skies.
Too for there.
So hot. I was burning up in a 5 mil wetsuit. I could have been in a 3.2. Could have been in I think there was a guy in a spring suit out there actually. If I remember
that's right.
Correct. Yeah. But it was just so inviting. And I've said this before, Mavericks can be the most inviting, most fun, still terrifying, but less terrifying big wave on earth where it's just like, oh, this is amazing. It's fun. And then the next swell could be an utter nightmare. Because at this time we were doing trips with Ian Walsh and he was getting some great waves and he got some psycho waves that day too. Actually, he had the steepest, latest drop I think I've ever seen on such a long board out there. And somebody didn't see him and they dropped in wide of him and air dropped and almost landed on him and he had to jump. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was crazy.
And but that's when we were testing the arrow nose, which is a really thick nose, and that's designed so when the board is flat and flying through the air and the air is traveling above it, the wind doesn't swirl off of it because it's kind of coned on the top, so it flies straighter through the air, and it helps you with airdrops at jaws. It also came from stand-up paddle racing because when you have more volume there, water doesn't tend to load on the deck, and water weighs a lot, so you end up having more speed because there's less drag. And I was unsure, still he was unsure how it would work if you had to knife a really late drop at Mavericks or YMA or something like that. And that session, when I saw him make that one particular drop, I was like, okay, any later, you're not making it on any board, really.
Yeah.
So the arrow nose works. Like that was the confirmation. But it was the next swell we went back to and we were like so confident, like, gosh, we're just dominating out here. It's like I have it figured. It's not dominating, but like we have it so figured out. We know this wave. And it was freezing cold. So cold. I was wearing booties, gloves, and a hood, and I was freezing still. south wind. It had this lump to it. No one was really out there. It was still massive, but it wasn't chipping from deep. It was all loading up west. We call it the fang because if you drop off in the normal spot, no matter what, if you see a wide bit, at Jaws, if you see it wide, it'll hold and end up barreling. Mavericks, it'll just all come down at once. And every wave had a fang. And it was like, I could go, but I'm going to die. I'm going to go, I'm going to die. So you kept pulling back. And I ended up getting a couple, but the waves I got were smaller than the big ones I got on that other day. And I was way more scared. Me and Chumbo had to bail. Actually, Ian Walsh was a smart one. I think he just stayed on the boat the whole time.
Yeah.
But me and Chumbo were paddling. It was just, I think like 3 of us out there, 4 of us. And we bailed and my board went over the falls and landed on his board and we almost got tangled up. And the trip ended up being fun the next day when it got a lot smaller. But I think, egos were bruised for sure. Because all of a sudden, Mavericks went from the best wave on earth to paddle into, the most easy, the most beautiful, to the scariest, hardest place on earth to paddle into. Like the next swell, which was we went back to Maui, and 3 days later we got on a plane and flew back to Mavericks. Like
yeah. That first day, I think after that day, I think that's why I was pretty apprehensive to ever go back because everybody in the lineup was saying this is as perfect as it gets. This is the day, and I'm like, oh, it's my first day, and I should just finish my experience on that day. So like I said, I didn't even bring a board or anything, and you had like kind of mentioned in passing, like if you want to paddle out, you were out the whole time, but you said if you want to paddle out, just grab my spare 9.4
Oh,
and
that's
go.
a funny story. That was the day that all my burritos got eaten. Remember?
Oh yeah.
So some deep lore on this particular day. So no, I told you I had extra. I think I had 3 boards, and I was like, just take one. You might have taken my spare 9.4.
Yeah,
that was on my
9.4.
9.11, and you ended up getting some sick waves and stuff. And I didn't even know you were surfing because I was sitting far out. But that day I logged 12 hours straight. We went out at 6, and I think I came in the dark at 6, like to the boat or whatever. It was just one of those days.
Yeah.
And I think. So we always do this and we go by the Taco Bell, which is the best Taco Bell on earth is actually in Pacifica, which is just next to Mavericks, about 20 minutes away. And, but anyway, they have green sauce burritos, which nowhere else has. And it just tastes insane. So we got like 30 bean burritos. And I always tell people on the boat, like, hey, I got 30 so you can have some, and you just think common sense would be like, okay, have a burrito, but obviously leave me some, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, just, have is like, you guys, I got it for everybody. It's all good, like this is awesome. And it was one of our team managers from that area from Red Bull at the time. He's no longer at the company. He kind of left right after, not because of this incident, but just for other reasons. It should have been for this incident. No, but I like surfed the morning for like 5.5 hours, 6 hours. I'm like, okay, time to get a burrito bake. And I get to the channel. My big bottle of water is being poured on a photographer's face in the channel. And I'm like, okay, like at least there's still some water left, but like it's not meant for your face. It's my water. So that was one little nick, I was like, ugh. And then I go to the boat. I'm like, hey guys, can you throw me a burrito? And they're like, we don't have any. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, we gave them all out, and everyone in the channel had a burrito, And I was like, you gave away 30 burritos? They're like, yeah, you said give them away. I'm like, no, I didn't. I said you could have some. And it was such a bummer, but it was like this David Goggins moment where I was like, I don't need to eat. I can just pull the energy from the universe. Because the day was so good. If it was a bad day out there, I'd have been pretty frustrated. But the day was so good. I was just like, it's just one of those days it's going to make a better story. If, you just I love that it happened now. But at the time I was really hungry.
Yeah.
So somebody had like a chewed up third of a burrito and I like kind of ate a little bit of that and threw the rest away in the water. And
I think I got one luckily before it all ran out.
But I was like looking at you guys and I'm like, are you like, what are you guys doing? Like save me a burrito. And then the guy's like, one of the guy was like, I got burritos too, but it's in the car. And I'm like, dude, it's in the car at the harbor. We're not going back. Like, what do you think? He didn't know what he was doing. He was a nice enough guy, but after that I had beef. But anyway, it makes for a good story. And the day was just insane. It was
Yeah.
still top of the list. You know, one of the best big wave sessions anywhere I've ever had.
Yeah, I think that was probably still the best big wave paddle session I've ever had. I think it was the sick thing about Mavericks, which is different than Jaws, is that you can kind of ease your way into the nutser part of the wave. Jaws, you can't do that. It's like if you're on the wave, you're on a nuts part of the wave. But out there, I was able to sort of sit on the very corner and just sort of, I'd barely ridden guns at this point, even a 9.4. I think I've had, you know, maybe one or two Jaws sessions before this. And I was able to sort of shoulder soldier is what they call it out there, where you could just like catch the end and sort of get the feel for it. And then it was pretty cool is that in that session, I feel like I was only out for maybe an hour and a half. I wasn't out for super long, but I feel like every wave I was just getting more confident, going deeper and deeper and deeper. And then I got one wave that was still the biggest paddling wave of my life. There was someone in front of me, but it didn't really matter. But it was pretty confidence boosting to finally get a legit, I don't know how big it was, but a legit size wave. And I fell on it. Couldn't find my pole cord because I had gloves on and I couldn't feel it.
Oh no. So you're just like, I'm accepting it.
Yeah. And it was a huge whitewater. And I think I was able to get far enough over where you go into the deep water, and I fell and I like literally popped up in 3 seconds. And then after that, I was like, okay, I'm good. And then I drove the ski for the photographer the rest of the day and watched you.
That's so funny. Well, was that the day that there was a mutiny on our boat and Ian Walsh had to drive it in?
It was. I wasn't on it. We heard about it when we got back to shore. We were like, what happened?
I think I decided to stay out longer into the dark because I was having such a good day. And I'm just going to take the ski and you guys go on a boat. So Ian and Mark Chambers, our filmer friend, was there and they all went in and apparently, because the guy that we had gotten the boat from was nice enough, but he had just bought the boat and he was going to make it his business to go take people out to Mavericks, but he had never been out there. I don't even know if he even had his captain license.
And we didn't know this going into it.
We didn't know it at all.
Like, yeah.
He seemed legit. The boat was nice and he was freaking out and he was going around this reef and it was like at this point so big and it was just unloading on this reef, 20 footers and he was freaking out and he was driving just the worst possible way you could drive to avoid, you would capsize the way he was driving, like just all wrong. And so Ian Walsh literally was like, had to yell at him, like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he basically said they were in between like two giant waves and he had to grab the captain, push him back onto the chair, get in it and drive the boat between these two massive waves. And he basically stole the boat from him. Like it was a full mutiny. Gosh. And it was dark and they were basically between like 40-foot faced waves and the channel was completely closing out. The guy was trying to take his boat back and he's like, you sit the F down. And it was just chaos. And after this crazy big day and and by the time we go boat, I'm pretty sure he pulled up the boat and just like, he walked. Ian was like, I'm done with this. This was
didn't Ian have to help him load it on the trailer too? When we got
he had
back?
to do everything, I think. But he was just like,
gosh.
I think he was completely over it, obviously. And he was like, that was so dangerous. And I think it was the last time that guy ever took his boat out.
First
and I'm pretty sure
time,
he might have sold it.
Dang. That was a good lesson to vet
I think
our boat drivers.
Mark had Mark had his brand new red camera and, $50,000 worth of like camera equipment on there. And I think at one point a whitewater hit him and they were like halfway tipped over to capsizing. And then it like came back and it was just like, and Mark was like, thought he was going to die and everyone was like tripping. And luckily they had Ian to like, he's a fearless leader. So he just took control and a veteran big wave surfer.
Gosh, it's always such a scene. I'm just thinking back to the last time we were there, I think, which was exactly a year ago, that huge toe swell, the New Year's one. And remember all the crazy stuff that happened that day? There's rogue jet ski.
Gosh, I forgot.
There's all those stories from that day.
I mean, we could do a whole nother episode on Mavericks because I don't even know. I have so many experiences out there. I know you do too, but like just stories that we could go really in depth. But this one, do you remember? So we surfed Jaws before, and then we took a flight out, and we got in late over there, and then the next morning we woke up early, and that was the trippiest drive out. Do you remember that drive out? When we were driving out, it was so foggy. We couldn't see anything. And all of a sudden, these rocks appeared like 10 feet in front of trying to ski, and we were like almost ran into it because you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. You couldn't even. The only thing you could hear was the foghorn from the harbor. So you're like, okay,
so
the harbor's
eerie.
behind us, and the waves are coming towards us, but we couldn't see where the channel was, and you could take a shortcut. So boats usually go way around. You know, they go like a mile down the coast and come around the reef. There's like by where all the paddlers go out, Mushroom Rock, you can sneak through there. And I remember it was me, you, and then Lucas Chumbo and Lucas Fink was on the other ski next to us. And all of a sudden, this just giant, these rocks appeared. We're like, oh, not there. You go around. And that was one thing. It was so foggy. I think most of our session went a little bit undocumented in the beginning because I don't know if you remember this or not, but I got towed into a wave, kicked out, and then just
I remember
one
it
of
really
the
well.
biggest whitewaters I've ever been caught side from in my entire life came in. And I was so bummed no one filmed it because I wanted to see what it looked like on the camera.
That was right there. It was massive. I was trying to come and save you.
It had to have been maybe, I don't know, it felt like a 50, 60 foot whitewater. It was so big because there was like the definition of the whitewater was different, you know? And I was like not at the peak. It was breaking wide and all the boats I remember barely made it over the side.
It was in the channel.
It was in the channel, but it went top to bottom. And I was like, oh, my board's going on the rocks for sure. But I'm also just sitting there. And I'm like, I'm gonna get so worked by this thing. It was so big.
It was terrifying.
I remember it was like, I can't believe I'm starting this session. And is this gonna be the last whitewater I take? You know, and I was in deep enough water. I got pounded pretty bad, but I came up decently quick because it wasn't shallow. And then the rest of the session went on. And
yeah, my perspective from that was, so I towed you into that first wave, and in the back, like in the corner of my eye, I could just see this giant one behind, and. The way that sometimes
why did you tow me to that one?
Yeah, I know. That's the story of our lives sometimes. But that your wave that you're on, it flared into the channel. So like there was just I had to really guess where you were gonna kick out, and I guessed wrong, and I was too far away from you, and I just see this thing, and honestly, like the Sea-Doo we had it, we were so stoked to have a Sea-Doo there, but it wasn't necessarily the
we didn't
powered up version that
I think it was 180 horsepower.
Yeah.
And we run 300 horsepower at the time. Now it's 325. So I think you were very scared of losing it too. So
it was like you have to
don't take risks.
It's hard because you have to make the decision, and you have to make this decision in half a second where you're like, okay, could I get to him in time, slow down, get him on the ski, and then race out of this? And it just came down to lack of confidence in that particular machine because I just wasn't used to it. I think if we were here and we're so used to the machines we run here, I think it would have been doable, but it was really hard to leave you. And I was like, this is for the best of us. Either, you know, you're gonna have to take this one, or we both would have been in that situation, and then we'd have been screwed. So I had to leave you.
In that situation, I would rather not get picked up, you know, because then we're both screwed, you know? And actually you get more worked when someone picks you up and the whitewater catches up to you and you lose the ski, you know? And so I was like, all right, I'm dead in the water. Just pretend like it's not happening. Right. And then, but you know, moving forward, that day was really hard. We were not in rhythm. We ended up getting some cool shots and cool waves, but it felt like every wave we towed into, it would just disappear underneath us and it would be a terrible wave. And then the next one would be big. And we would go in the second one. And the first one was good. And you know who was really locked in that day was obviously Luca Padua and Aloe, who actually we talked about him last podcast. Those guys got like 100-foot wave out of Mavericks. Well, it's been yet to officially been measured, but it's a giant wave and could break the world record. Who knows? But they were in sync. A couple guys were in sync. But that day was really interesting because guys were towing in really deep. And it was unmakeable, and they were pulling into these unmakeable barrels. And I think, you know, I try to ride the waves to make them, and I wasn't going to just pull into a giant clamp. And so a lot of my waves, I think, didn't look as big because I wasn't in just the death zone. You know, I was kind of like on the face and just getting around the whitewater sort of thing. So this session was frustrating, but there was still some great moments and it was fun, but it was really frustrating because it was really hard. But do you remember when the funniest thing ever happened with the Lucases, Lucas Fink and Lucas Chumbo? Ridge, you and I are sitting there and we're waiting for a set, mile outside of the lineup, just Shark Alley. And all of a sudden, I'm like looking, I don't know, like those guys always like to wear jackets when they're driving because they get cold really easily, which is ironic because they basically live at Nazare. But Lucas was like putting on his jacket or taking
Lucas
it off.
Fink was,
Yeah, Lucas Fink, which is the gnarly skimboard kid who just rides like 50, 60-foot waves, finless, strapless, just makes towing in seem ridiculous with straps and fins. Gnarly. He got some crazy waves that day. But I think they were about to trade spots, and he was taking his jacket on, and it hooked the throttle of Lucas Chumbo's brand new jet ski. Brand new. Like, I think it only had like 15 hours on it or something. And the thing went full throttle straight to the pit at Mavericks. Full throttle. Because the jacket hooked on, and the wind was holding the jacket to the handle, and they both fell off, and they were floating in the middle of the ocean.
And then the skis just go into the, like, it was just going like, straight towards the impact zone. We were like, what do we even do? Like,
well,
you
like,
climbed onto the ski and you were like, should we go after it? And I'm like, no, let's not go after that thing. Like,
well, the problem was hard, there's no way if I went full throttle on our Sea-Doo, because it was going full throttle, there's no catching it. It was going to full throttle, like, and it had a head start. I was like, so somebody picked those two guys up, and we ended up started chasing it, remember? Yeah. And then miraculously, it goes into the bowl, where normally it's barreling 80 feet. The wind, like the jacket turns the steering, the handlebars. The thing turns, starts aiming at the boats and jet skis in the channel.
Everybody's like, run!
Our friend Aiden is on one of the other skis he was holding for us, the Sea-Doos. It blows past him. He didn't even notice it was coming. Like, it would have killed somebody. It honestly would have killed somebody. Blows past him, is going out, and it, like about like a quarter of a mile out, the jacket falls off and it stops. But it was the most radical thing. Like, honestly, knowing our luck, if it was us, that thing would have gone straight into the rocks.
Oh yeah, they got so lucky.
You don't get that lucky. It turned in on a wave, like, and went back out. There's a video out there. We'll
put the video. Gosh, that day was so trippy. I remember I towed you most of the day, and then I got on the rope towards the end of the day, and it was just like big days at Jaws. I'm so used to that, where you can read the wave, you can kind of know exactly how you're going to approach it.
The bigger it gets at Jaws, the better it gets.
Yeah, you can know exactly what line you're going to take from the second you're getting towed up on your board. That day it was like these mounds of water, and then some waves you thought was going to be the biggest wave of your life, and then it just disappears, and other ones you're going and you think it's small, and then all of a sudden it hits the ledge and explodes behind you. It was a trip. It was really hard, and I was like, after that, I was like, okay, Giant Mavericks is like maybe overrated for towing. Like, I'm not so sure about it. And then we saw the swell from the Eddy swell, and it was like, okay, that's how it's supposed to be when you're towing. That looked insane. I would have loved to have been there for that.
I mean, but even that day, a Mavericks is just gnarly because it doesn't just move outward. It moves like deeper too. The bigger ones that cap go deeper. And so you end up, it's really easy to end up way too deep and behind the bowl. You think you're like on the shoulder of this giant wave, and then all of a sudden the bowl just pops up in front of you, and it's a closeout. And I know like there was guys that were packing like 60-foot barrels because they were just too deep, and you got to pick your waves A, wisely, but B, it's just when it gets that big like that, it's really easy to end up too deep, even on the most perfect days. Although that day, if you picked it right and played your cards, you could get away with it. But the day we did it, and part of the reason why we didn't make it for that last swell was because the conditions looked very similar, and it was like fun, but it was also really dangerous and like maybe not worth going when it's south wind. But you just don't know unless you go. Wish we would have went, but it's just the way things go. Hopefully there's another 100-foot swell this winter.
Yeah, and I'm really hoping, and this might be a hot take coming from a big wave surfer, but I'm hoping that the 100-foot wave thing is just done, and he got the record, and then that's just not so much of the feverish sort of anticipation that's been for the last 20 years is when's the 100-foot wave ridden, and then he's such a deserving guy. He charges Mavericks, and it'd be sick if the first 100-foot wave is at Mavericks. But it'd be kind of good to get that
perspectives on it.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, Grant, it would be a life-changing experience if he got the first 100-foot wave, and it would be incredible for him. I think it's awesome. I've always thought, though, that big waves have been under measured, just because it's camera angles. It's the way, where do you start measuring? Where does the wave flare up if that moment was captured? I feel like I've seen 100-foot waves just based on when I walk through New York City and I see a 10-story building, and that's like equates closely to 100-foot, height. And I see a person below it, and I'm like, I've seen people ride waves that big, like
Interesting.
I
Yeah.
literally have seen that. So I almost think 100-foot waves have been kind of ridden, and surfers generally under measure because it's what surfers do. It's always smaller than it really is. That being said, I also think sometimes maybe big waves are a lot smaller than we're trying to call it.
Yeah.
Maybe we're wrong after all. And I know Sebastian Steudtner, who's the current record holder for the biggest wave. I think it's at 92 feet, which is pretty darn close to 100 feet.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he worked with some drone companies, a technology with Porsche to basically bounce a signal off the surface of the water, and it could tell how high it was off of sea
interesting.
level, which is the best way to do it. Hard to, I would say, consistently have the drone out there to be in the right place at the right time on the biggest day ever, but that's how you're going to know for sure. And I don't know what the results were from that, but I think that's the only way to really, truly tell. And on these really big days, just have somebody out there flying a drone parked in one spot and just hope the biggest part of the wave is right there. Or tracking you. I'm not sure. Great if it is. I think fun if it isn't the 100-foot wave,
search
because
is still going.
The search continues. Because I think in some ways, like, if the 100-foot wave is ever surfed, does that finally squash the interest of like people chasing the biggest?
That's what I'm
waves ever?
saying. Like, maybe it'll shift it to more performance, but then again, like you said, maybe we'll never know because it's just so hard to measure it. But I always think maybe the 100-foot wave is just the friends we made along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But I guess we'll see. It'll be interesting to see the Guinness. Hopefully they measure it soon, as I'm curious, because that thing was pretty big.
There's a lot of hype around it. I've seen Frank Chiarte, who's like the main rescue guy out there and also photographer. He does rescue and shoots photos at the same time, which is remarkable. He got it the photo, and it's all about angles, and of course, and that's where that wave looked like 100 feet to me. And then I saw other kind of angles, and it could be just the lens, it could be the camera, where the wave didn't look quite as big. Maybe it looked closer to 60-foot wave, not 100-foot. It's big.
Big's big at one point.
Big is big, and to the non-big wave surfer, the height might matter, but sometimes when you're riding the wave, you don't know how big it is, and some smaller waves feel bigger than the biggest of waves. It just, some waves maybe have more energy stored inside it. Who knows? And it's not as tall. I don't know. But that being said, I'm really curious to see it all play out. It's good for big wave surfing. I think it'll, bring some more attention to it, because out of all professional surfers, I'd say big wave surfers are probably the poorest, because any money they do make, they put back into water safety and travel and boards and jet skis and everything.
It's an expensive sport. Yeah,
it's an expensive sport, but a lot of these guys aren't rich, and they make it work. So if you want to be a big wave surfer, you can make it work, but you just got to be able to pay the price. Maybe possibly with your life, or just financially. Hopefully, just financially.
Yeah.
If you pay it forward financially, most likely you won't have to pay with your life.
Yeah, ideally. But I think that's a good place to wrap up. I got to go and get my crap together for tomorrow. We're going
out to Jaws tomorrow.
Yeah, there's a pretty big spot. I have to go. I'm going to go get a jet ski, bring it up here, get my gun from the warehouse. Gone yet? No, because Scott had to check a few things.
It's at our parents' house.
Oh, but then I forgot that my gun is in the warehouse. I have to go to the warehouse anyway. So I'm going to go do
it's
that
pretty,
now, but
it's just,
it's
I've had to do that. You could always go 30 minutes earlier at 5 a.m.
That's true. I'd rather sleep in. I'd rather do it now, but
get an extra 30.
Yeah, but right on. Well, hopefully next podcast we're recapping some good big wave days.
We have tomorrow, right? And then we have the 8th, looks possibly giant.
Yeah.
It's big wave season, people.
Yeah, here it is. So this is a good little filler episode in between, and then we'll get back to the current events. But thanks for watching. As always, let us know if any comments, questions for us, and we'll see you next week.